Chapter 7. It is difficult to know that I may help my brother only once, and then it must be in the fight with the monster. I must watch as he fights, picking my time. It is difficult. My desire is to help him in all things, but my brother is strong. He has never run from a fight, but he does not search out a fight. He has a balance far beyond his years. Our ancestors are pleased. As his brother, I am proud. The Sarge didn't say another word. He pivoted and headed back toward the barracks. The direction he walked in surprised Nakai. Nakai had been expecting the Sarge to use the outside entrance to the officers' quarters. Instead, he headed towards the front hallway that connected Nakai's barracks to a half-dozen others along the base's main road. The Sarge climbed the steps, and Nakai followed, the sound of their boots on the wood echoing in the quiet night. No more shooting. No shouting. The silence continued to grate on his nerves. The Sarge opened the double doors and went inside. As Nakai stepped through the doors, he cringed. No one had opened windows in the hallway, and it was even hotter than his barracks had been. The usual odors of sweat and floor polish seemed stronger than normal. All the doors were closed, and the hallway was empty. The Sarge turned away from Nakai's barracks and headed towards D barracks, at the far end of the hallway. The click of their boots on the smooth floor was the only sound. D barracks was nearly empty, with most of its unit on maneuvers near Rattan. The place felt abandoned. Nakai swallowed, wondering what the Sarge had planned. The Sarge turned down a narrow hallway and stopped halfway. He waited until Nakai caught up, then shoved open the nearest door, labelled Storage. Nakai met the Sarge's level gaze, unsure what was about to happen. The Sarge hated him. Nakai knew that much, but not enough to lock him away in a storage room in an empty barracks for fighting before lights out. Something else was going on. "Get in there," the Sarge said, holding the door open. Nakai didn't hesitate. He had no idea what the Sarge had in mind, but he knew he could take him if he had to. The Sarge was tough, but not that tough. Inside the storage room, only one light bulb illuminated the space between boxes of toilet paper and a rack of brooms and shovels. The closet was hot, but not as hot as the hallway, and it too smelled of floor polish. Nakai was all the way inside before he saw movement near the back of the closet. Colonel Atherley stepped forward as the Sarge closed the door. Somehow that made the single bulb seem brighter. Atherley nodded to Nakai, then leaned back against some cases of bedding. He held 2 sheets of paper in his left hand, and even though he was staring at them, he didn't seem to be reading them. It seemed like this was a staged scene, especially for Nakai's benefit. Why, Nakai had no idea, but he'd bet he was about to find out. He snapped to attention, saluting. "At ease," Colonel Atherley said. "Sorry I can't offer you a chair, son." "I don't think the corporal minds, sir," the Sarge said. Nakai turned slightly. He hadn't realized the Sarge had come in with him. Nakai stopped near the colonel and assumed the at-rest position. Nakai recognized the tone the colonel was using. Friendly, wanting to impart bad news gently. This was not a good sign of what was about to come. "Sorry to get you out so late, Corporal," the colonel said. "But as you can tell, we didn't want anyone observing this meeting." Nakai nodded. The colonel stepped away from the crates. It was a signal that the friendliness was about to end. "Now understand one thing, Corporal. This conversation goes no further than this storage closet. Whatever we tell you is strictly classified." "Yes, sir," Nakai said. He didn't add that there was no one he could tell, since Deetle, his only friend on the base, was dead. The colonel nodded and glanced at the papers in his hand. Preliminary testing on that ship we retrieved this morning has us worried. He paused for a moment, then looked Nakai right in the eye. You were right. It most definitely is not a surveillance craft. Nakai felt his breath catch in his throat. He swallowed before saying, I was hoping I was wrong. So were we. The Sarge had stopped beside Nakai and was also standing at rest. We believe, the colonel said, that the ship is a hostile combat vessel, and we believe that you did indeed run into its operator. Nakai felt his shoulders tighten. He didn't like how this was turning out, but then he didn't know what they could tell him that would make things better. Were you able to retrieve Deetle's body? He asked. His people never abandoned the dead. He knew he would have to live with that action for a long time to come. The colonel glanced at Sarge. There was something in that look, a communication that confirmed Nakai's suspicions. The shots he had heard were the signs of a mission gone wrong. I'm afraid the retrieval team, the colonel said, ran into some resistance. We have others going out now. Better make it a platoon, Nakai said. Then realizing that he nearly made a faux pas, he added, Sir. A shadow passed over the colonel's eyes. Apparently he had already realized that. Too late, of course. The Sarge cleared his throat, but the colonel didn't seem to take the hint. The loss of the retrieval team obviously disturbed him. The Sarge took a deep breath and turned to Nakai. The fact that the intruder got so close to the base poses some serious questions about our security. Nakai hadn't even thought of that. He'd been too concerned about Deetle and the loss of the tank. The Sarge's words seemed to break the colonel's reverie. Without his craft, the colonel said, I doubt he's much of a threat to the base as a whole. Nakai nodded, but didn't believe the colonel for a moment. The fighter that had killed Deetle this morning would be a very serious threat to anyone. But it wasn't Nakai's place to argue with a colonel. He'd nearly made that mistake a moment ago. On the other hand, the colonel continued, glancing at the Sarge, the pilot of that craft is probably anxious to eliminate the only person who can recognize him. Nakai felt his heart pump harder. So this was what they had brought him here for. This was the bad part, the reason the three of them were hiding in a storage closet. The sergeant and I have decided it's best that you take that leave from the base. Colonel, Nakai said, frowning. The intruder is armed with... I remember what you told me, son, the colonel said. After we inspect Deetle's body, we should have a better idea of what we're up against. But, sir, Nakai said. The colonel held up his hand. Son, your being here may also complicate matters for us. Trust our judgment on this one. Nakai said nothing. He had been in the army long enough not to trust their judgment on anything, but he had also been in the army long enough to keep quiet about his lack of faith in the system. I've pushed through your 3-day pass, the colonel said. It will take effect tomorrow morning. We'll provide transportation to the nearest bus stop, the Sarge said. I know we can count on your confidentiality. Nakai said nothing. The other two men looked at each other. Apparently they had thought a pass would make him happy. They probably thought this was the easiest way to silence him. He could almost hear the Sarge recommending the plan. Nakai will be so pleased to go that he'll do anything we want. Hell, by the time he gets back, he'll probably have forgotten anything strange had happened. As if he could. But they hadn't been in the desert this morning. They hadn't known how close he had come to the same kind of instant death that had taken Deetle. Really, the colonel said, this is for the best, for all involved. I'm sure you can see that. Nakai said nothing. This was the best for them, of course. but it was probably not the best for all involved. In fact, he couldn't think of a worse plan. He was the only one who knew how the intruder operated, what kind of weaponry it had. At least, he could guess that it was more sophisticated than the army's, judging by those blue bolts, and he knew how quick it was. The corporal and the sarge had asked perfunctory questions this morning, but they hadn't believed him, and now they were sending him away. "You can see that, can't you, Corporal?" the sarge said. "That this is for the best?" They wanted him to answer. They needed his verbal agreement. His silence was bothering them, just as it had bothered Duncan. "Yes, sir," Nakai said, not wanting to get into any more trouble. He could speak up, of course, but it would do no good. They had already devised a plan. They had already made up their minds about this intruder, and they had already figured out a way to handle the problem. So what if it didn't work? "Good, Corporal. I'm glad you understand," the colonel said. He nodded to the sarge, then turned his attention back to Nakai. "You are dismissed." Nakai saluted, then spun, and left Sergeant Coates and Colonel Atherley in the storage closet. He had to get out of there quickly before he lost all control and told them how stupid he thought their plan was. His best, his only friend, had died this morning, and instead of letting Nakai help them get vengeance for that death, they were making him leave. He would have been an asset to them, but they didn't see it that way. They saw him as trouble. They had always seen him as trouble. And like always, they were wrong. At a quick walk, he headed for the mess hall. He had a phone call to make before he tried to sleep. Alda was going to be surprised and happy he was coming, even though, at the moment, he wasn't.